you, Audrey. Not long ago, Virginia Kane Horowitz, Ginny, could you raise your hand? Ginny sat down with representatives of the Surry Historical Society for an oral history session. She pointed us in the direction of the story that Kathy, Engel, and myself are going to relate to you tonight. Thank you, Ginny. We couldn't have done it without your help. Members of the Kane family left their mark on Surry history in a number of endeavors, including but not limited to storekeeping, fishing, and captaining ships on coastal and international waters. Captain Newell Kane, with his wife Josie and children, lived in a large house which is directly across the road from the Surry store. You've all seen that house right next to the road. In 1925, on a voyage in the schooner Nellie Grant from Ellsworth to Newark, New Jersey, with a load of barrel staves, the ship and crew were lost at sea in a gale off Cape Cod. Newell's father and grandfather and great-grandfather were all sea captains, as were his two sons, George Elmer Kane and Willard Kane, even though most of you will remember Willard as the legendary storekeeper in Surry, and of course we have his sign in the back. But the most storied and famous captain in the Kane family was Newell Kane's older brother. His name was John Kane. He lived for part of his life in Blue Hill and part in Surry. Captain John Kane was shipwrecked 3 times, but is best remembered for his rescue of the crew of a British steamship off the coast of Brazil. If you go to the Blue Hill Library today, take a look at the oil painting that hangs over the fireplace in the main room. It is a scene of that rescue. On the mantel in front of the painting is a silver trophy cup, which Queen Victoria ordered to be presented to Captain Kane with the following inscription: presented by the British government to John W. Kane, master of the bark Monrovia of New York, in acknowledgement of his humanity and kindness to the crew of the SS Elmeet of London, which foundered off the coast of Brazil on the 5th of February in 1895. In a letter written to the Ellsworth American on March 31st, 1895, written just a few weeks after the incident, Captain Kane described his adventure in great detail, and that's the story we're going to tell you tonight. On February 5th, 1895, off the coast of Brazil, Kane encountered the British steamship Elmeet, bound from Buenos Aires to Antwerp, Belgium, with a cargo of wool, grain, and live sheep. It was stuck on a reef with its hull breached, and it was shipping water. The captain of that ship still hoped to free it from the reef and make it seaworthy. So he asked Captain Kane to stand by in case the Elmeet could not be saved. Kane waited nearby for 7 whole days during this process. And then he described what happened, and these are his own words. Quote, at 4 a.m. on February 12th, I cast off my lines and dropped to a safe anchorage some 400 feet from the sinking ship. At 6 a.m., just as the sun was rising over the calm water that surrounded the ill-fated steamship Elmeet, the water had reached the furnaces, when there was a partial explosion and the ship rolled over on her side and sank, leaving on the surface of the sea 1,500 sheep swimming in all directions. Never shall I forget the intelligence exhibited by these poor animals. Over 1,000 of them swimming to my ship, the Monrovia, looking up and pawing at the side and bleeding in the most pitiful manner, as though asking to be saved. The ship's boats, 4 in number, were at the stern with long painters, big painters of the ropes tied to the ship. The ship's boats, 4 in number, were at the stern with long painters, and over 100 sheep huddled together with their chins on the painters, and remained there for 4 hours until the breeze came up and I had to get underway. I got down into the boats myself and pulled 27 of the sheep in, while the balance pawed on the side of the boats and bleated to be saved in the most painful manner, as if knowing what their fate would be. End of quote. If you look closely at that painting in the Blue Hill Library, you will see the sea is dotted with what looks like white snowflakes. That's the sheep. Captain Kane tried to land the rescued men at several ports in Brazil, but was turned back each time because the political situation in that country was unsettled. He also hailed 2 British ships he encountered to take off the crew. They refused. He had to transport the men, which, as I said, were 21 Englishmen and 7 sheep tenders. He had to transport them to the British colony of Barbados, which was 500 miles away. And of course, this strained the Monrovia's food reserves. So of course they had to butcher and eat most of the rescued sheep. They arrived in Barbados on March 20. Captain Kane sat down and wrote his letter to the South American from there. But Captain Kane's troubles did not end in Barbados. As he headed for home, the Monrovia struck a sunken wreck near St. Croix, Virgin Islands, and sank. But Kane and his crew were all saved. He arrived home in Maine on July 8 and announced that he was retiring from the sea. He bought and operated the Morrison Medical Company in Bar Harbor, which manufactured and sold elixirs, cough medicines, and pills. But despite his retirement as a master mariner, the following story from the South American, dated 3 years before he died in 1917, shows that all sea captains never do really retire. So this quote is from the South American, May 6, 1914. The date line is East Surry. At the time, Kane's family was living in the building that is now the Surry Inn. The article reads, Captain John W. Kane of the schooner Mildred May loaded pulpwood for Bangor and expects to bring back a load of poles for the power line soon to be built from Ellsworth to Blue Hill. Captain Kane had several sisters, and I'm going to ask Captain Engel to come up and tell us a little bit about them. But before she comes on, I want to remind you that next month at our public meeting, which will be August 16th, we will feature University of Maine Professor of History Liam Reardon. And he will talk about issues around Maine's bicentennial and make connections between when we achieved statehood and the situation or the state of Maine today. And we're looking forward to that. I've actually seen him speak early before COVID at the beginning of the bicentennial, and he's quite riveting, and he has wonderful slides. So I hope you can join us for that. Okay, now I'm going to call on Kathy to come up. Sabrina! Sabrina!
And so begins our story of Sabrina Kane. Captain John Kane had signed Sabrina on as a cook on one of his trips, and afterwards Sabrina related this tale of the trip. We made the entire trip, and when we were coming into port, a damn little mouse ran across the cabin and I jumped on a chair and screamed. That was the first time on the trip that the crew knew I was not a man. On another trip with Captain Kane, Sabrina was relegated to being in charge of the store. It was customary for the captain of a ship to take goods to sell to the crew while on the ship's journey. Well, apparently Captain Kane took tobacco, but two different qualities of tobacco. One of good quality, which he kept for himself, and the other a cheaper grade for the crew members. Sabrina did not think that was a bad deal, so she sold the better quality to crew members. When her brother wanted some tobacco, there was only the poor quality left. It is said that Captain John was not happy and was quite ready to throw Sabrina over the side. Sabrina married Marshall Stevens, and they had two children, Clara and Omar. And Omar married Amanda Henry, and they had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And one of those sons has been mentioned tonight, Russell Stevens, who was the Surry town constable for about 30 years. And another son was Harold, also known as Red Stevens, who also lived in Surry in the village. One of Russell Stevens' sons, as mentioned, Robert, wrote the oatmeal stories and about his childhood in Surry. So quite a few tales of the descendants of Sabrina Kane can be found in that book. Again, we'd like to thank Ginny for a lot of these stories, and a couple of others, Larry Kane and Kenneth Marks, for some of these anecdotes we've been sharing. There was a younger sister, Martha, who was a lifelong Surry resident who married Edward Hamilton. We don't have any more information except she died of the influenza in January of 1919. A reminder that the devastation caused by the flu during that time reached Surry. The youngest sister, Harriet, died at the age of 3. Hannah Kane was the oldest of the sisters, born between John and Sabrina. In the 1870 census, she and Sabrina were both working in a cotton factory. In 1881, Hannah married a scientist, Dr. Moritz Hasenclever. He was born in Surry, but when married, it was reported that he lived in Philadelphia. They had no children, and Ginny related to us that the couple lived in Massachusetts. Ginny's great-aunt Hannah would come to visit her sister-in-law, Josephine Kane, who lived in the home across the street from the Surry store, Newell Kane and Josephine Kane. Later, when Hannah was widowed and in need of medical care, her family took care of her there in that house. It seems that great-aunt Hannah had a few idiosyncrasies. She wore hoop skirts, as was fashionable in the day. However, when Hannah saw a piece of brightly colored fabric that she liked, she'd cut it and pin it onto her skirt. It became quite the patchwork. Perhaps, having been married to a scientist, Hannah was quite mindful of health issues. She may have been overly cautious, as whenever she went out, she would put paper bags over her shoes. I'll demonstrate. Mentioned that Hannah was quite wealthy, but that didn't stop her from being thrifty. She would repurpose her Christmas cards. Whatever cards she received one Christmas, they were sent to someone else the next year, with the name of the previous sender crossed out. Ginny said it got to be quite a game to see if they could figure out who had sent Aunt Hannah the Christmas card that they received. And with that Christmas story, I invite you to share some refreshments, including the Christmas party fudge from the recipe of the Surry Volunteer Department. Thank you for coming, and those of you who were on the police department, we invite you to please come to the stage so we can get pictures. Thank you so much.